Bart Ehrman is an apostate from the Christian faith. I do not in any capacity advocate much of what he claims or represents. He, however, because he doesn't even believe in God anymore, I don't think, has no reason to take sides, so to speak, in theological debates about the nature of Christ. It wouldn't really concern him whether God is one person or three people, since he doesn't really believe in him anymore. As abhorrent as I find many of his sentiments and beliefs, I have to admit that he's seemingly on the mark with much of what he says about the Orthodox corruption of Scripture in his book of the same name. Not all of his opinions on the Scriptures are sound, but with a little discernment, it's easily detectable what should be heeded or discarded in what he has to offer in that book. All the quotes here are taken from his book, The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, The Effect of Early Christological Controversies on the Text of the New Testament. Yes, that title certainly compelled me to purchase the book. I won't be getting into how certain texts have been corrupted to make them seem a little more orthodox, as that term is so defined today anyway, right now, but rather how Christians, some willfully selective and ignorant, others just simply innocently ill-informed about their own history, neither herald nor profess the real truth about what the earliest Christians actually believed. Yes, one prevailing Christian trend is to rewrite history to make it more palatable in conformity to their own ideas regarding doctrine. For instance, most Christians wouldn't hesitate to tell you that in ancient Christianity, everyone was clearly a true saint who believed God was three people. Is this accurate? Or is it about as true and unbiased as the Jehovah's Witnesses Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book? Well, the least we can do is examine the other side to all the issues for a balanced and honest approach. Just like an Orthodox Christian would desire to urge a devout Jehovah's Witness to examine their true history, I, as an unorthodox Christian, urge you to examine the history of your system of beliefs just as seriously. After all, when we take biased men's selective assessment, ones with a specific agenda, mind you, as unquestionably true without critical thinking of our own weighing all the information, we're wide open for being fooled. Ehrman says, during its first 2.5 centuries, Christianity comprised a number of competing theologies, or better, a number of competing Christian groups advocating a variety of theologies. There was as yet no established orthodoxy, that is, no basic theological system acknowledged by the majority of church leaders and laity. Different local churches supported different understandings of the religion, while different understandings of the religion were present even within the same local church. Further, he says, the classical understanding of the relationship of orthodoxy and heresy met a devastating challenge in 1934 with the publication of Walter Bauer's, and there's no way I'm going to try to pronounce that, possibly the most significant book on early Christianity written in modern times. Bauer argued that the early Christian church in fact did not comprise a single orthodoxy from which emerged a variety of competing heretical minorities. Instead, early Christianity embodied a number of divergent forms, no one of which represented the clear and powerful majority of believers against all others. In some regions, what was later to be termed heresy was in fact the original and only form of Christianity. In other regions, views later deemed heretical coexisted with views that would come to be embraced by the church as a whole, with most believers not drawing hard and fast lines of demarcation between the competing views. To this extent, orthodoxy in the sense of a unified group advocating an apostolic doctrine accepted by the majority of Christians everywhere did not exist in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, nor was heresy secondarily derived from an original teaching through an infusion of Jewish ideas or pagan philosophy. Beliefs that were at later times embraced as orthodoxy and condemned as heresy were in fact competing interpretations of Christianity, one of which eventually, but not initially, acquired domination because of singular historical and social forces. Only when one social group had exerted itself sufficiently over the rest of Christendom did a majority opinion emerge. Only then did the right belief represent the view of the Christian church at large. Ehrman goes on to note that Bauer's claims were based upon the closest scrutiny of the evidence from ancient sources for the Christianity in various regions, particularly Edessa, Egypt, Antioch, Asia Minor, Macedonia, and Rome. He found that, contrary to the claims of Eusebius, who was a 4th century bishop who was influential and deemed the so-called father of church history, the predominant Christian view was what today would be deemed heretical. Ehrman further notes that even though there were folks scattered in these regions who embraced some form of what later became Orthodox, they were the minority, to be sure. Much of the literature and opinions produced by the so-called heretics, by today's standards that is, would not survive because, as Ehrman says, one would naturally not expect the victors of the struggle to reproduce the literature of their opponents. As Ehrman also notes, even those who seemed at least somewhat orthodox by today's standards, some of the much hailed and quoted early church fathers, namely, had certainly not imagined today's Trinity formulation in all its nuances so definitively or meticulously. There was definitely social ostracism, economic pressures, and political machinations that led to the orthodoxy held today. Not only that, the early church fathers that are venerated in some respect by so many Christians today as fathers of their faith had some truly peculiar and heretical beliefs themselves. A small sampling. Both Clement of Alexandria and Origen acknowledged that Jesus' body could readily change appearance at will, a decidedly docetic notion, with Clement claiming that Jesus ingested food not for nourishment, but simply to convince his followers that he actually had a body. And Irenaeus believed there were 4 Gospels because there were 4 winds and 4 corners of the earth, and therefore 4 pillars or Gospels upon which it is built. I see Christians all the time condemning Jehovah's Witnesses for following an organization and men with such a dubious history of peculiar beliefs. Yet they do the same thing. You'll often hear Trinitarians hailing the early church fathers, yes, the same ones with beliefs that were heretical, as if they are true heroes. And if it's okay to be so selective when presenting the beliefs of these heroes, then I suppose if we're going to be unhypocritical, that is, I could present a good case for the Watchtower. All I would have to do is omit all the lies, all the blood guilt, all the hypocrisy, all the questionable beliefs. Just like the Watchtower compels Jehovah's Witnesses to accept their interpretations of Scripture by use of the power exerted over them by certain men with weapons of intellectual intimidation and salvation threats intact, Orthodoxy accomplishes acceptance of its questionable dogmas much the same way. Ehrman says, "For it is a historical fact that, owing to a variety of reasons, one group within early Christianity achieved social dominance and enforced its views on other groups that had supported divergent opinions. Looked at in socio-historical terms, orthodoxy and heresy are concerned as much with struggles over power as with debates over ideas. Should we really want to garner our truth from the effects of power struggles, social dominance, bloodshed, intellectual intimidation, threats, and the like? The history of the establishment of what is now termed Orthodox has an ugly trail of blood. Besides, Ehrman notes, if the term orthodoxy means the dominant form of Christianity, then prior to its domination, the views of this group are scarcely orthodox. So it's kind of funny how orthodoxy wasn't always orthodox at all, yet people choose to believe it was because they don't or won't look outside the box where they are any more than the average Jehovah's Witness would. If they do, the repercussions might not be any more attractive than those suffered by conscientious Jehovah's Witnesses who question the protocol of the Watchtower organization. Fact is, our traditions and what we've always been taught, that which is thoroughly and stubbornly ingrained in our conscience, is not necessarily true or real, but how palatable it is to continue believing it is and deceiving ourselves at all costs to maintain the comfort it compels. How horrible it would be to have to tell ourselves we've been deceived, receive possible shunning from our respected and well-loved peers, receive constant labels and threats to our salvation, etc. Such terrible things would of course scare most any human being, Christian, from the kind of critical thinking and genuine truth-seeking they should embrace wholeheartedly. After all, if there's any possible way to take scriptures, twist them, and make them fit our heritage, that is often undertaken to ensure the comfort that results from already being completely and utterly right about everything. Peer approval, cozy traditions, feels good. And as human beings, it's only natural to run vigorously toward what feels good and away from what hurts. Even though Jesus said we're called to suffer as he did. Even if Jesus seems to contradict what we've been taught and come to believe everywhere, left and right, commonsensically and earnestly, we human beings have a consistent and concerning history, right along with the Pharisees, of insisting that we have the truth that Jesus lacks, when it's the other way around, of course. I mean, it's so easy to find a few texts here and there that can conform to our false ideas, just like the Jews who opposed and persecuted the Christ had in their arsenal. They too possessed a particular understanding of sacred texts. They just knew they were right. Deception wasn't possible for them at all. Being blind was real for others, those other poor souls, but not for themselves. Yah's simple words and Christ's simple words weren't good enough. Not at all. But they sure knew the scriptures, right? Doctrines that are true don't need to have their history of development concealed, colored, or fabricated. They also don't need to be formulated at all, because Christ stated creeds that were simple, clear, and the opposite of mysterious. God didn't want us to calculate his number, that he was, while we ignore common sense mathematics and qualify his son's words at every turn, just to make them fit a cherished belief, of course. The Pharisees had cherished beliefs too. Christ challenged those. Christ also challenges you. Let him.